The state legislature just wrapped up its session, and today we dissect Florida's agenda for health care reform, school budgets, a crackdown on gambling, and more with State Representative Steve Crisafulli of Merritt Island. Crisafulli is a Republican who has been elected by peers to serve as House Speaker starting in 2014. I asked him about his signature accomplishments this year, including an Everglades restoration plan. And I asked him about special political role he'll play between now and next year's elections. Here's the interview. Governor Rick Scott wanted the state to pass a law that took a lot of money from the federal government to insure more Floridians with Medicaid. You were among the House Republicans who said, no, let's not do that. Why?
Well, I think you'll notice that a lot of what we heard was it was free. Well, as we know, Matt, nothing's free. Florida has its challenges, obviously, with a growing population. But what the feds were looking at was not a program that we thought in the House that would work best for Florida. And ultimately, we put out our own plan that would have certainly been something that we thought we could live with, and it was something that was going to be using state revenues, not federal dollars. And the fact of the matter is, over the last 10 years, Medicaid has doubled in cost to the state. We spent over $170 million, or $170 billion, excuse me, in the last 10 years. And on the same projection that we're on right now without an expansion of Medicaid, we would extend that another $230+ million. So it's billion dollars, excuse me. but with that, it's a very expensive thing for the state of Florida. I mean, we talked about how the commitment from the feds would be there for 3 years, and then it would become part of Florida's budget. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't work for Florida. Medicaid is not a program that I believe in. I don't think it's a great program. It does have a lot of fraud in it, and I think there's better alternatives for Florida. And the Florida House came out with an alternative that was basically a market-based approach that we would subsidize people with their monthly expenditures on the program. And it would work under a program that would be funded by state dollars, and we felt that was a better way to go. We do not want to be dependent on the federal government from the standpoint of dollars and cents. That's how the original Medicaid program started, and at the end of the day, that's over 30% of our budget. So, there's a lot of challenges there. There's a lot of information that generally doesn't get out to the public, but ultimately, the House plan is what we thought was the best approach.
So what happens next year? Are you going to take up this issue again with some kind of compromise or some kind of a state level?
Well, we feel, I mean, obviously, the House had our plan, the Senate had a plan, the governor had a plan. We still feel confident in the plan that we've put forward, just simply from the standpoint that we're funding it. It's something that's on a glide path that Florida can still afford. It takes care of the childless adults and those on SSI, and the parents of those on kid care, and it doesn't necessarily take care of the 25-year-old that's walking around with a new iPhone. It's a program that is what we feel meant to be for those that are in need, and it's the safety net approach. So we feel that our program was the right way to go. Again, the federal program is something that's funded with deficit spending. I mean, right. They talk about, well, why don't I take the free money? Well, it's not free money. Well, what about when that money goes to another state? Well, it doesn't, because it doesn't exist. It's deficit spending. It just goes on top of the $16 trillion bill that Washington currently has.
What does the when you talk about it's an alternative, it wouldn't use Medicaid. Who would insure them? I mean, is it a voucher to go get there's insurance to one of these groups that's gonna privatize Medicaid too?
Sure,
in Florida,
there's a federal exchange,
okay.
And the federal exchange is where people could go on and find their policy.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. What about this argument though that we're all going to pay a lot into Obamacare one way or another. We're going to pay some taxes. We're going to pay probably higher costs for our private health insurance, some other fees on that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But then now we're not going to take it back into Florida, so we're net losers on Medicaid. I mean,
well, that's what I was saying. From the people say we're a donor state, we should be taking the money. But the fact of the matter is that money doesn't exist. I mean, Washington doesn't have that money sitting in a bank account somewhere. It's deficit spending. It's not money that's just ready for Florida to take. It would be money that we would have to just apply to the deficit, and we don't think in the Florida House that that's an appropriate way to plan for Florida's future.
Let's talk about the budget. That's the biggest thing that you have to do every year, pass a balanced budget. What's in it this year?
Well, this year we certainly prioritize our spending as we've done in the past, and as I was telling you earlier, this is something that I've never got to experience, to actually have surplus in our budget. And to that point, I think it's because we've made the tough decisions over the past several years, and it has put Florida in a posture moving forward to be prosperous. And I'll tell you that this year we were able to fund education with an additional $1.5 billion. $480 million of that goes to teacher pay raises. Will be based on a merit program, and then we did give state workers pay raises as well, which works on a graduated scale. $40,000 being one level below, and $40,000 above would be another level from the standpoint of pay raises. So we're able to work on that front. We had a lot of good opportunities with environmental applications from the standpoint of an Everglades deal that was a historical opportunity for the governor to go to the feds and work with them on an $880 million 10-year plan. We've helped in economic development arenas and continue to look for opportunities to bring businesses to our state from incentivizing them. And of course, my thing with incentivization is always to make sure that those businesses are bringing something to the table. We continue to look at that arena. We put more money into tourism, into our ports, and further economic development of space. So it was a great year, but most importantly, there was over $2.5 billion that we put away into savings, and that's that rainy day fund that we always talk about. And certainly, we hope that we never see those tough times again here in Florida. But I think from a conservative, principled standpoint, we did the right things, and we put money away for the opportunities that hopefully don't come later. But the money's there.
Speaking of savings, Governor Scott just line item vetoed about $350 million worth of things, including I think there was a couple of projects here in Brevard County, including a Space Institute at Florida Tech, that were on that list. Where does that money go?
That money just goes back into that rainy day type thing. It's not something that we have to go back out to Tallahassee and reappropriate that money. It just does not get put into the budget, and it gets put to the side. So again, the governor has the opportunity to do that veto list, and he looks for, much like myself as a business person, the return on the investment. If he didn't see it in those programs, then he struck it from the budget. And overall, he agreed with 99% of what the House and the Senate passed, and I think together that shows the commitment moving forward.
What, in terms of space, I mean, obviously that's a big issue. You represent Merritt Island and areas that are impacted by, the downsizing of the shuttle program. What kinds of things did the legislature pass or were in the budget that you think might help space in particular?
Sure. Space has been something that's just been near and dear to me since the day I came in because of the timing of the shuttle program and everything that's happened out at the Space Center. We've continued to try to work to make sure that we give space the toolbox that they need to move forward, and with that means Space Florida. Space Florida, as you may or may not know, and many in the audience may or may not know, is the economic development arm for space here in Florida, as well as other alternative industries in the state. But certainly we were able to give them their operating budget this year, which is very important to them because that's a non-recurring dollar for them every year. So they have to go up and fight every year to to continue to get funded. So we're able to fully fund them there, and we also funded them in some financing arenas so that allows them to go out and look for matching dollars to bring alternative opportunities to the state as well. So the commercial space side of things is really starting to grow here. I mean, we've heard some great news as of late in the papers, and I think there's great opportunities continuing to move forward. But along with the money, there was also some legislation that continued to level the playing field for Space Florida, which is very important for us to make sure that we're able to compete with these other states that continue to come and try to take business from the state of Florida. So we're able to do that, and overall, I think we had a very successful year, and hopefully Space Florida will be able to use that to their advantage moving forward.
Your name was attached to things related to water, large and small, the Everglades, even lawn fertilizer. I know the Everglades was a big issue to you. Describe that process, and what did you achieve?
As I said, in the opening, it's a very historical opportunity for the state of Florida to be working with the feds on this program. The governor went to Washington to work on this to make sure that restoration for Everglades was something that Florida was continued to be focused on. So this year had the great opportunity through my committee chairmanship as well as just the position that the speaker put me in to bring together the interests from the environmental community as well as the agricultural community as well as other industries to come up with a solution, with restoration moving forward, and a lot of it had to do with money, but at the end of the day, as in many things, money doesn't ultimately solve all the problems. It was, you know, a collaboration of issues together that brought these groups together to make sure that we can move forward from the standpoint of restoration of the Everglades. I mean, it is truly, you know, it's a national treasure, and for us it's important to make sure that we preserve that. So with that, I was able to bring the environmental community as well as the agricultural community together and come up with a solution for that moving forward.
Well, what was the problem? Had it stalled? Was there just no money for it? Or had, I think there was something that I heard or read about the sugar industry's role in cleanup had expired or something? What was up?
Yes, in fact, the expiration of, you know, the polluter pay type scenario was in place, which ultimately a lot of people don't understand, but it was the ag privilege tax, which the sugar industry has paid for many years to help, you know, put that into the restoration of the Everglades. Well, the truth is they were the only ones paying. And, you know, there was never a long-term commitment from the state from the standpoint of a reoccurring dollar,
okay.
As well as, you know, the agreement that we have through Washington with the program called SERP. So, you know, what this program did was it laid it out for the future of the Everglades, saying that, you know, the industry will continue to, you know, to do their part, being the sugar industry, as well as the other agricultural interests that, you know, that are on the Everglades agricultural area, known as the EAA, and together with that, there will be a long-term plan to make sure that the state is funding, you know, with a commitment moving forward to make sure that everything goes together. Along with that, though, there's a lot of other things that we worked on in the budget, from hybrid wetlands, you know, to water treatment facilities and that sort of thing, to make sure that the 7 million people south of Lake Okeechobee have a clean water source, because at the end of the day, that's who's ultimately affected by, you know, by the Everglades.
Now let's talk about the small one. Lawn fertilizer. This seems to be the funny little sleeper issue of the year. Did the legislature pass something regarding lawn fertilizer? I know that a bunch of cities have passed ordinances trying to restrict how much you can put on. What's up?
No, we didn't pass anything on lawn fertilizer. As the chairman of state affairs, these types of issues come through my committee process, and you know, early on there were some reports that I was pushing or proposing this type of legislation. I in fact was not. In fact, I was just trying to be a good chairman and make sure that, you know, our members were working with the industry folks on this issue. So I made an effort to call, you know, the folks on the fertilizer side of the issue, as well as applicators and golf course people and those in the environmental community together and try to work out a solution. Really, this was an issue that was going to be amended onto an environmental bill in my committee at one point, okay. And lo and behold, I'd talked to one of the environmental group representatives early in the morning before that committee, and she said, I really wish we had more, you know, water science type people on that committee to study this issue. And so I asked the bill sponsor to postpone that bill, or postpone the amendment at that time, and work further on it. Really what it did was it put together a work group okay. to look at this issue, as well as a moratorium that it was putting in place to keep municipalities and counties from having this patchwork of ordinances around the state. Right now, the issue is kind of overseen by DEP with the model ordinance, and okay. The model ordinance is what we said would, you know, be okay for everybody to use throughout the state, and we've been talking about that for many years. But it seems like every year somebody comes back with a bill wanting to preempt, you know, local governments from doing something. So this year the same bill sponsor did it again, and I just said, listen, we need to take a different approach, and that was when we started talking about you know, forming this work group, as well as, you know, the moratorium. And you know, I mean, the fact that I was sitting in the room trying to work through this made it my issue, I guess. But it wasn't my issue. It was just something I was trying to help a member work on, and ultimately nothing passed this year out of the legislature with regard to that issue. Okay.
So at some point in the future, local governments around the Indian River Lagoon may be able to pass more restrictive ordinances, maybe not, but we'll find out based on science in the future.
Well, actually they can. Right now, today, the way the state law is we recommend the model ordinance, but they can exceed it.
Okay.
In fact, the city of Rockledge has, I believe, offered some blackout periods during the summer months, which, you may or may not make sense because the summer months is when you have your
when
growing
the grass
season.
absorbs
Yeah,
the fertilizer.
so that's, so to your
Right.
point, yes, so there are some local governments that have done that throughout the state. Brevard County has adopted the model ordinance. I think the city of Melbourne has adopted the model ordinance, which is what, we at the state level feel is an appropriate, way to move forward. But certainly there will be more conversations on this, I'm sure, just because it comes up every year, and we'll continue to have that conversation. So.
Right. You are House Speaker designate. When do you become House Speaker?
After the election in 2014. So basically at 12:01 a.m. on the next morning after the election, I would take over the speakership.
Okay.
Providing I get reelected, and that's obviously every 2 years we're up for reelection, and it's important that I don't take that for granted.
Between now and then, do you have a special role that you'll be playing in the party or within the majority, or?
Sure.
Fill us
Well, first and foremost, my role of being an elected official by my constituents is what's important to me. So going to Tallahassee and representing my district is first and foremost. With that, I have the role and responsibility from the Speaker to chair the State Affairs Committee, as well as the Vice Chair on the overall Appropriations Committee. So those are my roles in the House from the standpoint of legislating. As far as the party goes, it's my responsibility as the Speaker designate to raise money on behalf of the party and to make sure that I bring back, first and foremost, the members that are with us today and serving. And that's certainly what I'm focused on moving forward, to make sure that we have a strong majority that ultimately represents the will of the people in the state of Florida. And we have a great membership in Tallahassee, and I'm certainly looking forward to the next year and a half and taking the opportunity to make sure I'm building those relationships with those members.
I was struck by a tweet you sent out earlier this year urging, I think it was a tweet, urging your fellow Republicans to, regarding the Allied Veterans group that was, I guess, indicted or faced criminal charges for scamming its customers, telling them where their money was going to go. He's saying that they should, Republicans either give their money back or donate to charity. Why? Explain that.
Well, I just felt it was the responsible thing to do. We took money from an organization that obviously at the time we didn't know how they were operating, and you could certainly go back and look through any organization that's operated wrongly in the past and say, oh, we should give money back, based on what they did. But at the time, I was taking over control of my part of House campaigns, and I felt it was important that we be, set a good example and be leaders on the issue and give back where we could. And I personally gave back out of my individual campaign account, and I gave it to a local veterans group here on Merritt Island. The state party did the same thing, and I thought it was just an appropriate thing to do to make sure the money that was given to us would actually go to a cause, and ultimately we did that.
I didn't understand why the legislature voted to close all video arcades or adult arcades, or whatever we call them. They're strip mall casinos,
Sure,
really. Sure. Allied got in trouble allegedly for specifically saying they were going to be giving all their money, or a lot of their money, to veterans, but didn't. But why come down on all of the rest of the businesses that weren't affiliated with Allied?
Well, the truth is, they're just operating in a gray area. We've had this conversation for many years in Tallahassee, trying to figure out a way to solve this problem. There was a loophole, and we felt like it was an open free-for-all for gaming in the state of Florida. Yes, the truth is we're the 4th largest gaming state in the country. There's no hiding behind that. But to have gaming going on in the state of Florida with no regulatory agency to look over it is a bad thing, and that's how Allied got to where they were. And we just felt as a legislature that we had enough of it, and it was time to do something about it. And I know that there were certainly some that were working, consciously to run a fair and equitable business, but at the end of the day, there was just no oversight to that, that industry, and we felt it was the right thing to do.
Was it something that, like, the Seminoles and the Hard Rock group were pushing for, that they saw as competition? Or I know we have with the Club 52 and the owners of the Greyhound track, they're looking to expand into something major as well. Was it a conflict with them, or was it just something that you thought?
No, I've never heard from them personally on that issue. It was this thing that it was just a groundswell, and ultimately when things happened as they did with the lieutenant governor, and it was just something that came up, and it was the opportunity to say, you know what, there's something wrong here. And we wanted to make sure that it didn't give Florida a black eye, and at the end of the day, we did what we felt was the appropriate thing to do.
Another big thing that passed this year were ethics and election reforms. You mentioned those in a recent op-ed in Florida Today. Why don't you bring us up to speed?
Well, you know, we've had the history of talking about the problems with elections in Florida, and I'll just be honest, I never thought it was a state problem. I've always thought it was local, you know, elections problems. I mean, I think Lori Scott does an excellent job in Brevard County, and she has the same toolbox as any other, you know, county from the standpoint of running an election. So, you know, it was one of those things where we just kind of had to step in and say, we cannot continue to have this happening in Florida. So we looked for opportunities to make it a more efficient and acceptable, you know, way of operating those offices at the county level. So from an election standpoint, we put into place something that we thought was, you know, going to be better for Florida moving forward. And the truth is, there's only a handful of counties that typically have the reoccurring problems, but we felt like there was an opportunity for us to do something in Tallahassee. We heard enough from constituency about it around the state, and so we implemented that, and that was the important thing. You know, that was something we did early. I mean, it was just something that you had a bipartisan movement on this issue, and you know, at the end of the day, it was the right thing to do. So
longer hours, more early
longer
voting?
hours, yeah, longer hours. Well, it goes back to a lot of what was in place before with optional, you know, Sundays and that sort of thing. But
right.
Certainly longer hours and more of an opportunity. And again, you're not going to see a difference when we go to the poll in Brevard County because the way that we run it here is appropriate. I think what you're going to find is more accessibility in some of those areas in South Florida that probably didn't have it before that will now have it.
What about ethics reforms for legislatures? I know that
Sure.
there were some things that passed regarding voting conflicts of interest, disclosures.
Yeah, it was something that was important for us. I mean, you know, the governor's talked about it quite a bit. I mean, the ethics thing is important from the standpoint of being a representative. I mean, it's never easy to go up there and think through all these things that, you know, you got to think about. But when you have a conflict in your voting, you need to be aware of that, and you need not be voting. And you know, the ethics reform is just something that came down from the Ethics Commission, that we worked on a lot of those issues with them from the standpoint of implementing things and more or less updating our ethics reform package in Florida. And it's something that, you know, with technology and all those things that are out there, it's an ever-changing world that we live in. So it's important for us to make sure that we were doing that, as well as that kind of ties into the campaign finance reform too. And
right.
A lot of that has a transparency and accountability and reporting, you know, more frequently and that sort of thing. So that's, you know, those are the things that we try to work on this year to make sure that, you know, we're accountable to the constituency.
What was the key change there with campaign finance? Higher limits, more reporting?
Both, yes. Higher limits from a state representative level as well as a local government level. You can go to $1,000 now contribution. Some states are unlimited.
It was $500 before.
It was
correct?
$500
Okay.
before, correct. Some states are unlimited. Some of them have higher caps. We just kind of went to the middle on the number, and I think at 500 we were the second lowest or something in the country, whatever it was. But it's just one of those things. At the end of the day, there's not going to be more money in politics. It's the same amount of money. It just depends on who gets it and who doesn't now. So
just fewer games in terms of bundling and going
sure.
through back channels
Sure.
and that kind of stuff.
And we did get rid of the CCEs, and you know, you talk about back channels and that sort of thing. Committees of continuing existence were something that people could funnel money through to ECOs, and nobody would know who paid for, you know, for a mailer for months or weeks to come. You know, so we got rid of the CCEs in that package, which will help bring more transparency to the process as well. And you know, from the standpoint of campaign contributions, the statewide offices are now $3,000 versus $500. So statewide officers get a little bump too. So.
What do you make of Rick Scott and his leadership style? Did you have an opportunity to interact with him
Sure.
this year?
In this new role as Speaker Designate, it's certainly put me in front of the governor quite a bit more. And you know, I have to say, as a businessman, I like the idea that, you know, we always measure our successes, and continuing to look at those opportunities moving forward are very important to the state, because I think that, you know, there's got to be some kind of accountability, and he's a man of measurements, and I like that about him. I will say that, you know, we have, as a legislature and the governor, have made some tough decisions over the last couple of years. And again, to the point I made earlier, I think at the end of the day, they were the tough decisions, they were the right decisions, and they will move Florida forward and to be prosperous. And I think the governor's been a big part of that.
He had, I think that sounded like one of the major things that he got or passed was the, I guess, a tax break for manufacturers. What is that?
Sure, that's a full-fledged tax break for 3 years for manufacturing, and that can really roll into the conversation that we had earlier about space. That will be something that certainly helps that industry. But, you know, he was looking for an opportunity again to draw business to our state. This is certainly an out-of-the-box way of thinking. Again, it is only for 3 years, so if it does work, the legislature would have to re-up this opportunity. But you know, it's the governor's business mind at work, and that's what he's trying to do, is continue to look for opportunities. I mean, look, we've got, you know, lowest unemployment rate that we've had in 5 years. We've got over 320,000 jobs that we've created in the last couple of years. You know, I think the governor's done a good job, and I look forward to continue to work with him further.
We have just about a minute left. I wanted to ask you, what kind of issues are your constituents calling and asking you about or putting on your agenda now?
Sure. It's still a lot about jobs and economic development. I mean, that seems to still be the #1 issue in Brevard County. Certainly education has been an issue, you know, throughout my term, but I feel like we're really turning the corner. I mean, no other legislatures in the history of the state of Florida have put more money into education than this Republican legislature that we currently have, and we're committed to, you know, to those issues moving forward. And we're going to continue to work on education by continuing to challenge our kids. It's, again, not all about money, but it's certainly about trying to find ways to challenge our kids. And you know, this year we're able to also thank our teachers for the commitments they've made by, you know, doing the teacher pay raises, and I certainly look forward to continuing to work on those issues as well.
Steve Christofouli, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, that's our program. Thanks for joining us. Remember, viewers can comment on anything they see in this program or in Florida Today by sending an email of 200 words or less to letters@floridatoday.com. I'm Matt Reed. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you right here next Wednesday on WBCC and FloridaToday.com.